Alright, so hi, I'm good, and I'm here to show you how armor works in Path of Exile. So armor is a mechanic of physical damage. If you take a big physical hit, armor mitigates some of that. This is the character sheet. The physical damage hit that armor, your estimated physical damage reduction is weighted against, is a 750 damage physical hit, or around that number. So as you can see, with about 1,000 armor, there's 10% mitigation. With 2,500, there's about 22% mitigation. And the equation that it follows is this one right here. So damage reduction factor is equal to armor over armor plus 12 times damage. And you can visualize that by graphing it on a 3D plane, where Z represents the amount of physical damage reduction. So X in this example, it represents the armor, Y represents the size of the physical damage hit, and Z represents how much damage mitigation there is. So as you can see, as your armor goes up, you get a lot more physical damage against small hits, and as the damage increases, you get a lot less mitigation from really, really big hits. So that's kind of how that works. But as you can see, this kind of goes up linearly. So this is pretty much almost a straight line at really, really high values. So it does not work like evasion does, because evasion has a power less than 1 in it. So as you get more and more evasion, the effective evasion rating kind of tapers off at some point. So around 8,000 evasion, I think, is where you have this point of diminishing returns, where I just don't think it's worth it to stack more and more evasion. But armor isn't like that. You can stack armor to the sky and you keep reaping more and more benefits from it. So it's really, really good for that. I guess a little history about how the game kind of changed. So way back in the day, there were pretty much every single build did a couple things. Almost pretty much every build grabbed Inner Force, pretty much every build grabbed Elemental Adaptation, pretty much every build grabbed Unwavering Stance and Iron Reflexes, and everyone ran Purity. And there's a good reason for this, because as I said, the strength of evasion builds is that they could mitigate a lot of added elemental damage and added extra types of damage. But you can't really evade extra physical damage. Like, you can still evade that, but that's like the really strong strength of evasion builds. But elemental adaptation back in the day granted 5 to max resistance, and with Inner Force, if you ran Purity, because Purity used to give +4 to all elemental, or +4 to maximum elemental resistance, you could get up to 85% elemental resistances for really not that many nodes off the tree. So at 85% elemental resistance, you pretty much take no damage from elemental damage sources. Like, pretty much outside of a minus max map, elemental damage doesn't really do any damage. So because of that, the only other thing you have to worry about is physical damage. So there's Iron Reflexes to deal with that. So you take Iron Reflexes, you run Grace, you run Determination, and with just that, because you also have Inner Force as well on top of that, now you've pretty easily gotten up to, I think, like 8,000 evasion, around there. Or 8,000 armor or so, with like just a few armor nodes. So, you know, pretty much for free get, 5 to 10,000 armor, and be pretty much immune to physical damage and elemental damage. And unless it was a really, really big physical damage hit, like a Vol Smash, there was not that much, yeah, there was still plenty of mitigation against pretty much everything but like outrageous scenarios. But that's all been changed, so now there's actual build diversity, so people can do things like make evasion builds, and also some other stuff got changed, like accuracy on monsters was reduced, and evasion on monsters was reduced. I don't know, there were a lot of changes that made evasion a lot more viable than it used to be. But what does armor do, and like what are the exact values and how it works? So armor, as you can see, this is simply a spreadsheet that is effectively a spreadsheet graph of this 3D plane. So that's all this is. And we can kind of toy around with the values in here really easily and get exact results back. So against small damage hits, so really the armor portion of what you should care about damage with is around here. It's about 1,000 to 10,000 armor, and under hits that hits that are under around 2,000 physical damage. because above that, getting very much mitigation gets harder and harder. So as you can see, if you get around 4,000, like if you get crit by a Roa charge and have to be shocked, that's going to do a lot of damage, even if you have a lot of armor, like 10,000 armor. Like it's still going to do about 4,000 damage after armor is taken into account. However, against small damage hits, you can pretty easily get 30% mitigation against most of them. And that's what makes armor really strong, because it's a really assured defense. Evasion can kind of screw with you. Sometimes it just works against you. Entropy rolls just might not work in your favor, where you get hit, like, you evade like a skeleton, and then the boss hits you, and you evade like, you know, another 2 crap hits, and then like the boss hits you again, and like you just never evade the boss. And that's kind of what evasion does, and it really does not feel safe in a lot of scenarios. But armor never gives you a false sense of safety. If you run into an area and you take damage, like you're always taking damage, and yeah. So evasion, you run in and you don't take any damage, and then you get one shot by stuff. Armor doesn't give you that false sense of safety, which is what makes it so strong. So you run into an area, you take damage, and you're like, oh, I'm taking damage, then you run away. Before you die. So yeah, this is the kind of the portion where you actually care about these kind of small hits. As you can see, like, it's pretty easy to get a lot of mitigation against small hits, but large hits, not so much. It's pretty easy to get a lot of armor if you take, say, iron reflexes, and then you use a granite flask on top of a jade flask. So jade gives a lot of flat evasion, granite flasks give a lot of flat armor. Then you could roll the flask specifically of reflexes and of iron skin for another 100% increase to evasion, and another 100% increase to armor. And all that together can probably give you around like 30,000-ish armor pretty easily. So, you know, you could probably get up to around this area and care about these numbers if you were prepared for that. So say you saw Vol smashing you, you could pop all those flasks, and you know, you could get to about 30% mitigation even against the most damaging hits in the game. But then you could also stack endurance charges on top of that. So endurance charges provide a flat increase to all physical damage reduction. So after armor's been taken into account, so say this, like, you know, 51% here, if you take an endurance charge on top of that, now you simply get 4% more mitigation. So it's just a flat increase. So even against really big hits, endurance charges provide the exact same amount of mitigation. And if you stack these things really high, like say you get 7 endurance charges, let's kind of put that back, you can see that even against really strong hits, there's still a lot of mitigation. So even with a fairly low amount of armor, like 10,000 or 6,000 armor, you can still get, you know, as much defense as it would require with 30,000 armor before. And this is what kind of makes these really silly rings called the comb signs really strong, because each endurance charge you get on top of the one you already had provides a lot more effective increase in physical damage reduction after a while. So, yeah. Endurance charges are incredibly strong when stacked along with armor. But then on top of this, you could use a skill called Artic Armor, which provides another flat damage reduction after all this stuff is being taken into account for. So say you have 7 endurance charges and you take a 1,600 damage hit with endurance charges, that's now being reduced to about 900, and then Artic Armor prevents another, I think, 250 of that. So this 1,800 damage hit has now been reduced from that to, I think, 650, which is a pretty absurd amount of mitigation. So, yeah, so this is kind of like how stacking armor and defense kind of works. Is there anything else I need to cover? I think that's about it. Oh yeah, or you can just simply not bother getting any armor and then just use Immortal Call instead, because it provides 100% mitigation against all physical damage of any amount. It's fairly strong. Anyways, I'm Gouda, and I will see you next time.